In the late spring of 1971, a 25-year-old woman named Clara Holt stood in the muddy back lot of the county maintenance yard in the heart of Vermont, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and diesel. Before her, piled against a chain-link fence like the bones of some forgotten mechanical beast, lay a heap of 60 aluminum orchard ladders. They were a portrait of failure. Some had frames so warped they bowed like wilting flowers. Others had rungs missing, leaving treacherous gaps in their ascent. Many had their feet broken or bent, making them utterly useless for their intended purpose of providing a stable platform on the uneven ground of an apple orchard. They were, by any reasonable definition, junk. The county had retired them, deeming them a liability, and now they sat, waiting to be hauled away for scrap metal, their value measured in pennies per pound. A man in greasy overalls, the county maintenance supervisor, came out of a corrugated steel shed, wiping his hands on a rag. His name was Mr. Harrison, and his face was a roadmap of cynical dismissals. He had a way of looking at people, especially people he did not know, as if they were a problem he had not yet been asked to solve, but knew he eventually would be. He saw Clara standing there, a young woman in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair tied back, looking at the pile of scrap with an intensity that puzzled him. "Help you with something?" he asked, his tone flat, implying that the answer was likely no. Clara turned, her expression calm and serious. "I was wondering about those ladders," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Are they for sale?" Mr. Harrison stopped wiping his hands. He actually chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "For sale? Ma'am, that's the county's scrap pile. We're paying a fellow to haul it off next week. You'd be doing us a favor." He looked from her to the ladders and back again, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. The men gathered in that dusty yard, a few other county workers and a pair of local farmers who had stopped by for a part, had been trading machinery and sizing up deals since before she was a thought, and they believed they knew exactly what they were seeing in her. They saw a naive young woman, probably new to the area, who mistook a pile of dangerous junk for a bargain. "I'll buy them," Clara stated, not as a question but as a fact. This seemed to genuinely surprise Harrison. He squinted. "All of them?" "Yes, all 60. Now the other men were paying attention. One of the farmers, a man with a perpetually sunburned neck, let out a low whistle. "What in the world are you gonna do with 60 broken ladders?" he asked, not out of genuine curiosity, but as a form of public ridicule. "Gonna build a staircase to the moon?" The other men laughed. It was not cruel, exactly, but it was deeply condescending. It was the laughter of men who believe they hold all the practical knowledge in the world, and they were witnessing someone operate outside of its established rules. Mr. Harrison shrugged, a gesture that said it was not his job to save people from their own foolishness. "All right then," he said, a grin playing on his lips. "You can have the whole pile for $30. That's 50 cents a piece. Basically firewood price. But you have to haul them away yourself. By Friday." He named the price as a dare, a final test of her absurdity. $30 was not a lot of money, but it was $30 spent on something certifiably worthless. "I'll take them," Clara said, pulling a worn leather wallet from her pocket. "Please," Stroke counted out 3 $10 bills and held them out. Harrison took the money, his expression a mixture of pity and disbelief. He wrote her a receipt on a greasy slip of paper, the transaction feeling more like a punchline to a joke than a piece of county business. As Clara walked toward her old pickup truck, she could hear the murmurs behind her. $30 for kindling. Some people got more money than sense. That's the Holt girl, took over her folks' place. Guess she's in over her head. She did not look back. She did not need to. She knew what they saw. They saw splintered aluminum and warped frames. They saw 60 individual pieces of garbage. But Clara Holt, well, she saw something entirely different. Now, let me explain who Clara Holt was. She was not a fool, and she was not a stranger to hardship. Her parents had passed away in a car accident just 3 years earlier, leaving her, at 22, the sole heir to the family orchard. It was a beautiful piece of land, nestled in a valley with rows of aging apple trees that her grandfather had planted, but it was not a prosperous one. The orchard operated on the thinnest of margins, a delicate dance between the price of apples, the cost of labor, and the whims of the weather. For 3 years, Clara had poured every ounce of her energy into keeping it afloat, learning the hard lessons of pruning, spraying, and, most of all, harvesting. The harvest was the crucible. It was a frantic, labor-intensive period that determined whether the entire year would end in a small profit or a crushing loss. The conventional wisdom of the time was straightforward. You hired as many pickers as you could afford, gave them ladders and canvas picking bags, and hoped they worked fast enough and carefully enough to get the fruit into the bins before the first frost. But it was a system built on inefficiency. Workers spent more than half their time climbing up and down ladders, not picking. They carried heavy bags slung over their shoulders, which tired them out and often led to bruised, damaged fruit as they jostled against rungs and branches. A bruised apple was a lost apple, its value plummeting instantly. Every year, Clara watched a significant percentage of her profit literally fall to the ground or get damaged in the bag. Debt was a constant specter, a low-hanging cloud that threatened to release a storm of foreclosure notices. She knew she could not continue this way. She could not simply work harder, she had to work smarter. And that is where her grandfather came in. Let me tell you about her grandfather. His name was Thomas Holt, and he was more of an engineer than a farmer. He had planted the orchard, yes, but he saw it not as a collection of trees, but as a living factory. He was a man of quiet observation and relentless tinkering, a figure of immense practical wisdom who believed that the solution to most problems was not more force, but a better system. He had farmed with a unique philosophy, one that set him apart from his neighbors even then. They saw him as eccentric, a man who spent more time in his workshop than in his fields. But he was simply operating on a different level of understanding. Clara had spent her childhood as his apprentice. She did not just trail behind him during chores, she worked alongside him in his sanctuary, the barn workshop. It was a place that smelled of motor oil, sawdust, and hot metal. While other girls were learning to bake, Clara was learning to weld, to read technical manuals, to diagnose a sputtering engine by its sound alone. Her grandfather taught her his core philosophy not through lectures, but through shared work and quiet demonstration. He taught her to see the geometry of the work. "Look at the orchard, Clara," he would say, standing at the edge of the rows as the sun set. "The trees are planted in lines for a reason. There is a path, a flow. The work isn't climbing the ladder. The work is getting the apple from the branch to the bin. Everything else," and here he would pause, letting the weight of the idea settle, "everything else is wasted motion, wasted time, wasted money." He was obsessed with efficiency, but not in a corporate, soul-crushing way. His goal was to make the work more elegant, more humane. He despised debt with a quiet passion. "A bought tool owns a piece of you," he had told her once, while showing her how to retemper an old chisel. "You're beholden to the bank, to the manufacturer. But a tool you build, or a tool you improve, you own it completely. It answers to you." He believed in self-reliance, not as a stubborn refusal of help, but as the ultimate form of creative freedom. When he passed away, he had not left behind much money. Instead, he left Clara a tangible legacy of his wisdom. Tucked away in a dusty footlocker in the workshop was a set of his most precious possessions, a series of thick, leather-bound journals. They were not diaries filled with personal feelings. They were engineering notebooks, meticulous records of his observations, calculations, and inventions. The pages were filled with his neat, angular handwriting and precise, detailed sketches. There were diagrams of water pumps, notes on soil composition, and calculations on the tensile strength of different woods. And, deep within the third volume, dated 1958, was a chapter titled The Continuous Harvest. In it, her grandfather had laid out a radical idea. He had sketched a system of interconnected rolling platforms designed to move between the orchard rows. It involved nets to catch the fruit and a conveyor system to move it directly into bins, all but eliminating the need for pickers to climb up and down with heavy loads. It was brilliant. It was elegant, but it had one fatal flaw. He had designed it to be built from steel, and he had never had the capital to acquire that much raw material. It remained a dream on a page, a theoretical solution without a practical beginning. Clara had been studying those journals for 3 years, absorbing the logic, internalizing the philosophy. She understood the geometry of the work. Now, let me stop and ask you something. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea that no one else could even see? An idea that, to the rest of the world, looked like madness? That is the position Clara was in, standing in that muddy lot. Let me tell you what she saw in that pile of junk. The men in the yard saw 60 broken ladders. Clara saw 60 prefabricated, lightweight aluminum A-frames. She saw the chassis for her grandfather's dream. The county, in its infinite and unintentional wisdom, was practically giving her the exact raw materials her grandfather could never afford. The warped frames did not matter. She did not need them to be perfectly straight, only to provide the basic triangular structure that was perfectly shaped to straddle a row of apple trees. The missing rungs were a blessing, not a curse. She was going to remove most of them anyway to make way for her own additions. The broken feet were irrelevant. She was going to put them on wheels. She was not buying 60 broken ladders. She was buying 60 modular, lightweight, perfectly shaped foundations for the most advanced harvesting system the county had ever seen. The $30 she handed Mr. Harrison was not the price of scrap. It was the seed capital for a revolution. The quiet action of hauling them back to her farm was an ordeal in itself. It took her 4 trips in her rattling old Ford pickup. On each trip, she drove past her neighbors' properties. She saw the curtains twitch in their windows. She saw men stop their tractors in the fields to watch her pass, her truck piled high with what looked like a metallic bird's nest. She could feel their judgment, a palpable wave of pity and second-hand embarrassment. She ignored it. Her focus was absolute. She unloaded the final ladder into her grandfather's barn, the pile of twisted aluminum filling one entire bay, and closed the heavy wooden doors. To the outside world, she had just sealed herself inside a tomb of foolishness. But inside, she was standing in a cathedral of possibility. She took a deep breath, the air thick with the ghosts of her grandfather's work, and picked up the first ladder. She laid it on the concrete floor and studied it, not as a broken object, but as a collection of parts. Her hands, guided by her grandfather's journals and her own determined vision, went to work. The subsequent 2 years were a master class in patience and solitary toil. The rhythm of Clara's life became brutally simple. From late summer through the fall, she ran the orchard, harvesting the old, inefficient way, just managing to pay her property taxes and keep the lights on. But the moment the last apple was sold, she retreated into the barn. That workshop became her entire world. Winter and spring were not seasons of rest, they were seasons of invention. She began by dismantling every single ladder. With a drill and a rivet gun, she painstakingly separated the frames, the rungs, the braces. She sorted the mangled pieces of aluminum into piles, usable A-frames, straight sections for bracing, and a heap of truly unsalvageable scrap. Her hands, accustomed to the soft skin of an apple, became calloused and scarred, marked by sharp aluminum edges and the constant friction of tools. Then came the construction. Following her grandfather's sketches and adding her own modifications, she began to build the first prototype. She needed wheels, so she visited scrapyards and farm auctions, not for big-ticket items, but for the cast-off remains of old milk carts, wheelbarrows, anything with a sturdy axle and a solid wheel. She taught herself to weld aluminum, a tricky and unforgiving process. Her first attempts were clumsy, the beads porous and weak, but she persisted, reading technical manuals by the light of a single bare bulb late into the night, practicing on scrap pieces until her welds were clean and strong. She built a rolling platform that could be attached to the base of 2 A-frames, creating a stable, mobile unit. The most ingenious part, however, was the collection system. She bought yards of heavy-duty canvas, and using an old industrial sewing machine she had salvaged and repaired, she sewed large, funnel-shaped nets. These would be strung between the A-frames, directly below the picking area. The idea was simple and elegant. Instead of placing an apple carefully into a bag, a picker could simply drop it a few inches into the soft, forgiving net. From the bottom of the net, she designed another canvas sleeve, a gentle slide that would guide the collected apples toward a central collection bag. To move the fruit from the mobile units to the large wooden bins at the end of each row, she engineered a small, lightweight pulley conveyor. It was a simple track, suspended from the tops of the A-frames, along which the full canvas bags could be slid, effortlessly, by a single person on the ground. The entire system was modular. Each of the 60 ladders would become a single unit, and they could be linked together to create a continuous harvesting line as long as a full row of trees. Throughout this long period of creation, the whispers of the community were a constant, corrosive presence. Mr. Harrison, the maintenance supervisor, had made the story of the ladder girl a staple of his morning coffee at the town diner. "Paid me $30 good for my scrap pile," he would say, shaking his head in mock wonder. "Still got her barn full of it, I hear. Probably just sits in there and looks at it." Her immediate neighbors were more direct. One, a farmer named Peters, whose land bordered hers, stopped his truck one day as she was crossing her yard. "Clara," he said, leaning out the window with a look of genuine concern. "Folks are talking. They're worried about you. Spending all this time locked away with that junk. An orchard needs attention. You're going to lose the farm if you don't focus on what's real." He meant well. They all did, in their own way. They were operating from a shared map of the world, and on that map, her actions led directly to a cliff labeled bankruptcy. They could not see her map. They did not know she was navigating by the stars of her grandfather's wisdom. There was, however, a moment of private doubt. It came late one night in the second winter, February of 1973. A blizzard was raging outside, piling drifts against the barn doors, isolating her completely. She was working on the pulley mechanism for the conveyor, and a critical bracket had broken for the 3rd time. The metal was too weak. Her design was flawed. She was covered in grease, her fingers were numb with cold, and she was bone-tired. Her bank account was a whisper of its former self. She sank down onto an overturned bucket, the broken part in her hand. For one terrifying moment, the weight of all the doubt, the neighbors', Mr. Harrison's, her own, crashed down on her. She looked at the sprawling, half-finished metal skeletons that filled the barn. It was an overwhelming, chaotic mess. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was just a foolish girl, lost in a dead man's fantasy, chasing an impossible idea while her real-world responsibilities withered. The thought of giving up, of selling the whole pile for scrap and just trying to be a normal farmer, was a sudden, seductive comfort. She sat there for a long time, the only sound the howling of the wind. Then her eyes fell on the old footlocker. She walked over, her movement stiff with cold and fatigue, and opened it. She pulled out the third journal and flipped through the brittle pages until she found the chapter on the harvesting system. Tucked into the back of the book was a small, handwritten note from her grandfather, something she had read 100 times before. It did not say, "Don't give up." It said something far more practical. It said, "The problem is not the problem. The problem is your attitude about the problem. Find a stronger material. Redesign the brace. The system works. You just have to make the parts." It was as if he were standing right there in the room with her. His voice, calm and rational, cut through her panic. She was not a fool. She was an engineer facing an engineering problem. She stood up, a new fire kindled in her gut. She tossed the broken bracket onto the scrap heap, picked up a fresh sheet of paper, and began to redesign it. The doubt was gone, burned away by the simple, powerful fuel of purpose. The first true test came during the harvest of 1,973. She could not afford a full crew, only 2 young men from town who were desperate enough for work that they did not ask too many questions about the strange contraptions she was wheeling out of her barn. She had managed to complete 10 of the 60 modules. They rolled them into the first row, the aluminum frames glinting in the autumn sun. It was clumsy at first. The wheels, the canvas nets needed adjusting. But then they found a rhythm. One of the young men stood on the rolling platform, moving slowly along the row, picking apples from the upper branches. Clara and the other worker picked from the lower branches. Instead of climbing, they were simply walking. Instead of carrying heavy bags, they were dropping apples into the soft nets. The fruit slid gently down the canvas funnels into the collection bags. Every 15 minutes, one of them would unhook the full bags and slide them down the simple pulley track to the end of the row, where they were emptied carefully into the large wooden bins. There was a quiet hum of efficiency to it, a flow. It was the geometry of the work, made real. At the end of that first week, Clara sat at her kitchen table and tallied the numbers. The results were staggering. With a crew of only 3, they had harvested 30% more fruit than her crew of 5 had the previous year. And when she inspected the bins, the difference was even more stark. The amount of bruised, unsellable fruit had dropped by more than half. It was a small, quiet victory, witnessed by no one but her and her 2 employees. But it was undeniable. It was proof. The system worked. Over the next 5 years, Clara's operation transformed. Each winter, she built more modules, refining the design, making them lighter, stronger, and more efficient. By the harvest of 1,978, all 60 of the original ladders were part of a massive, interconnected harvesting machine that snaked through her orchard like a silver serpent. Her yields became the talk of the county. Her fruit, known for its pristine quality, began to command a premium price from buyers in Boston and New York. The Holt orchard was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. The laughter had long since stopped. Now, when her neighbors drove by, they slowed down their trucks not to mock, but to marvel. They saw her small crew, moving with a fluid, unhurried grace, harvesting apples at a speed they could not comprehend. They saw bins filling up twice as fast with half the people. The whispers in the diner changed. "Did you see what Clara Holt is doing? Her harvest was done 2 weeks ago, and mine's not even half finished. How is she doing it?" Eventually, the questions came directly to her. It started with Peters, the same neighbor who had warned her she would lose the farm. His crew was behind schedule, and an early frost was being forecast. He came to her, hat in hand, his pride swallowed by desperation. "Clara," he began, "I'm in a bind. My crew, they're slow. The apples are just falling. I see your team. I was wondering, could I maybe rent them? And those things? Just for a few days? Clara agreed. She took her crew and 10 of her modules over to the Peters farm. In 3 days, her small team harvested a section that would have taken his larger crew more than a week. She charged him a simple fee per bin harvested. When Peters did the math, he realized that even with her fee, he had spent less money on labor and had a higher percentage of marketable fruit than ever before. He had made more profit by hiring her than by using his own people and equipment. Word of this spread like wildfire. That next season, 3 more orchard owners came to her. The season after that, it was a dozen. The Holt harvesting system was no longer a private experiment. It was a sought-after service. The 60 pieces of junk the county could not give away had become the foundation of the most efficient and profitable harvesting operation in the entire state. The ultimate moment of vindication arrived on a crisp October afternoon in 1979. Clara was in a neighbor's orchard, overseeing her crew as they worked their quiet magic. A familiar Greene County truck pulled up the dirt lane. Mr. Harrison got out. He was older now, the cynicism in his face softened by time, his posture a little more stooped. He did not say a word at first. He walked right up to the edge of the row and just watched. He watched the pickers moving smoothly on their platforms. He watched the apples dropping gently into the nets. He watched the full bags gliding silently along the overhead track. He watched the seamless flow of fruit from branch to bin, a process devoid of wasted motion. After a long time, he turned to Clara, who had been standing there, waiting. "I sold you firewood," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. Clara met his gaze. "You sold me frames," she corrected him gently. He nodded slowly, still processing the scene before him. "My whole crew, everyone at the yard. We all laughed that day," he admitted, his eyes fixed on the elegant machinery. "Told everyone at the diner about the crazy girl who bought my scrap pile." He paused, finally turning his full attention back to her. "How did you know?" he asked. It was the question the whole county had been asking, but coming from him, it held a special weight. "My grandfather taught me to look at the shape of the work," Clara said simply, "not the shape of the tool." Mr. Harrison looked her in the eye. The last traces of his old mockery were gone, replaced by a deep, undisguised respect. "Well," he said, his voice thick with sincerity, "I was wrong." He extended a calloused, grease-stained hand. "You weren't buying junk. You were buying a solution. I'm sorry I ever doubted you." Clara took his hand and shook it. The grip was firm, a silent acknowledgement that passed between 2 people who understood the world of work and machinery. It was not an apology she had ever needed, but receiving it felt like the final, satisfying click of a well-made machine falling perfectly into place. The narrative, of course, did not end there. The story of our lives rarely does. The narrative jumped forward decades, as they always do, faster than you expect. By the late 1990s, Clara Holt was no longer the underestimated girl. She was in her 50s, a prosperous, deeply respected elder in the agricultural community. She had acquired several neighboring orchards over the years, all purchased debt-free with the steady, reliable profits her system generated. She was a pillar of the community, known not just for her success, but for her wisdom. Young farmers, fresh out of agricultural college with heads full of modern theories, would come to her for advice. They came to learn about harvesting, but they left with lessons on finance, on the importance of patience, on the quiet power of observation, and on the virtue of owning your tools, instead of letting them own you. She became a mentor, a living embodiment of a philosophy that valued ingenuity over capital and systems over sweat. One autumn afternoon, you could find her in that same barn workshop, the place where it had all begun. It was cleaner now, better organized, but it still smelled of oil and metal. With her was her granddaughter, a girl of about 12 with bright, curious eyes. On a workbench between them sat one of the original aluminum A-frames from 1971. It was battered and scarred, covered in the dents and scratches of 30 seasons of hard work. It was, by any definition, an ugly object. But to Clara, it was beautiful. She ran her hand over its rough surface. "Your great-grandfather believed that the right answer was always the simplest one," she told the girl. "People look at a problem and try to throw money at it. He taught me to look at the shape of it first." Then she walked over to the old footlocker, opened it, and took out the worn, leather-bound journal. She handed it to her granddaughter. "This is a better inheritance than money," she said. "This teaches you how to see." The men in the yard that day in 1971 saw 60 broken ladders. They saw the cost of the junk. Clara Holt saw 60 solutions waiting to be built. She saw the value of the geometry. And in the end, the land and the work and time itself always reward the one who takes the time to understand their true shape. They had laughed at the firewood, but she had built a forest.